Hey, what's up, everybody? This is an open discussion with C3 Films. My name is Chris, and this is.
Cheryl, hello everyone.
Today, we are going to be talking about the Justice League, the Snyder Cut. So, if you've seen the original Justice League, then this is not the same movie. And so, you will be spoiled by what we're going to be talking about. There are different plot details and there are different things that happen in this version of the film. So, just because you've seen the Whedon version does not mean you know what's going to be happening in this one. So, if you want to be able to enjoy this discussion more, then go ahead and watch the Snyder Cut. It is 4 hours. Feel free not to watch it all at once and then come back and check us out. But without further ado, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. So, tell me, Cheryl, like, what were the things that you kind of like that you liked about the movie?
I liked that we got more information. I like the I just felt like it was almost like watching the extended version of Lord of the Rings where we got all of the deleted scenes and it was just a lot of extra goodies and I guess like now after watching it, I feel like I understand a lot more what they were trying to do in the other one, in the Joss Whedon cut. So I just
Yeah.
feel like everything makes more sense now. That's the main thing that I got out of it. Like I it just makes so much more sense as a whole. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's parts that they explain. Like for instance, how does Steppenwolf know where to look for the mother boxes at all? They actually make it known that the mother box called out to him, and that's why he knows where to go to Themyscira to find it. But then it's like, why did the mother box call out at all? Well, because like Superman died, so they explained that. They also explain how he finds where the mother box is in Atlantis, because in the Whedon cut he just shows up to Atlantis knowing where it is, but in this version, they actually take the time to explain that he's legitimately interrogating people so that he can figure out the location. So it's little things like that that just kind of add to the overall story structure of making sure that things just make sense from a storytelling perspective.
I would argue like there are some things that they took out and simplified in the other version, in the Joss Whedon version, that still made sense to me. Like I don't think I needed for myself to know that Steppenwolf knew where to find the boxes because of this and this and this. Like it's all right with me that he just knew where they were and like where to find them. Um, and that was one of the
Yeah.
big differences that you see right away is that he at the beginning of the other movie he just gets them pretty much right away, and then it becomes oh, now we have to solve this problem and prevent him from getting the last one, which works a lot better for a shorter movie. So that to me didn't bother me in the other one, and it doesn't bother me in this one either that they spent more time on it. It was just different. And much like the
Yeah.
other comparisons that we did between versions, I really do feel like these are two very, very different movies.
Yeah.
And it's easier to compare them because they are pretty much the same movie with different ways of telling the story, the same story kind of. Because the story's a
Right.
little bit different, motivations are different, and the explanation, obviously, for how everything happens is also quite different.
Yeah, and like that, the thing that you brought up about motivations, this like when you are doing a shorter movie, yeah, it makes sense. Like you can skip over those parts like that you were talking about. And at the same time, you have other movies like in The Dark Knight Rises where people will constantly ask, "How did Batman get back to Gotham?" You know, so there are some times when those details will bother some people. So that's just going to vary from person to person. But as far as the motivations are concerned, this movie doesn't need to do it. But they try to make motivations for Steppenwolf that go beyond just I'm just doing this because I'm a conqueror, and that's what he does in the first movie. In the Whedon cut, Steppenwolf's motivations are very much driven by the fact that he's a conqueror and he's just conquering this world for Darkseid. But in this, they take a little bit extra time just so that you know that yeah, he's still a conqueror, but he's not conquering this world just to give it to Darkseid. He's conquering this world because he's been cast out from his home, and by conquering this world, he can maybe eventually be accepted back into the home that he wants to go back to. So it gives him more stake in laying claim to this land. And then as the story progresses, an extra element that's added in this version that's not in the original is the inclusion of the anti-life equation, and that exists mainly to give a reason for why Darkseid himself would become interested and invested in this world beyond just Steppenwolf wanting to take it over.
Yeah, I definitely feel like this was a lot bigger. I mean, obviously it was 2 hours longer, but it was a much bigger story in general because it's not just this one movie. It's the previous two movies, and it's also the possible option of having several more movies. So it's kind of like Marvel, where like everything is kind of connected, and you kind of need to have all this other information from a bunch of other movies to understand what's going on. But at least they're explained in other movies. In this one, yes, there are two other movies, but I think one of the things that kind of made this movie longer was just not having the backstory or having the individual film for three of the main characters yet. Because at the
Yep.
time, there was no Aquaman movie, there was no Flash movie. There still is no Flash movie, but there will be. And there was no Cyborg movie. So Snyder pretty much had to give us the backstory in this movie. So, in a sense, it's kind of like having several movies in one movie, and that's part of why it was so long. So, I definitely appreciate that time that he took to explain the backstories for everyone, how they fit in, because that was not just fun to see, but it definitely helped a lot for character building.
Right. And one of the things with Cyborg is the fact that Cyborg really is kind of the heart of this movie. His story is tied directly to the mother boxes, and his struggle with his father is tied directly to his character growth and his arc. And that is also what bookends the movie. But that was completely taken out of the original Whedon cut. And the reason it's a challenge with this movie was because if you mandate that you want a Justice League film, but you don't want to do things the way that the Avengers at Marvel did it, where they had these individual movies where you can get to know them, well then that means you have to take some time to get to know them in the film itself. Because if you don't take that time, you're not going to care about these characters. And the only way that you can care is if you feel invested. And the only way you can feel invested is if we take the time to get to know them. And I can appreciate that. I can appreciate Snyder's strategy here because the fact is, people know who Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman are, and at this point, they had all gotten their own kind of introductory movies, and people are familiar with the Flash and Aquaman. So if you think about it, we actually didn't see we didn't see Barry get struck by lightning in this movie. We didn't need to. There's a Flash television show out. People are familiar with the Flash. We can say that the Flash is here, so we take the time to just show you the Flash's relationships and get a sense of who he is. But your general moviegoer might not know who Cyborg is. People who watch like animated stuff would know who Cyborg is, but the person that just goes to see the next Batman film that comes out or just the movies and doesn't read the comic books or watch the animated things, yeah, they're not going to know who Cyborg is. So it actually is even more important that you take the time to establish who Cyborg is in this movie. And in order to make people like Aquaman not feel out of place, you want to make him feel like he has some kind of stake in the story. So you have to spend some time on him as well. So all of the things that we just were talking about is exactly why the movie becomes a 4 hour movie. Although realistically, it probably could have been condensed to a 3.5 hour movie. I feel, and still have those same elements.
Mm-hmm. I definitely feel like there was. I almost feel like it's not a movie. This is not a movie. It's more of a mini series or part of a series of episodics. I mean, like, even the movie itself is separated by parts, which I thought was really weird, by the way. I wasn't a huge fan of that. And I can tell you more about that later. But I definitely feel like the way it is like being so long felt long partially because of how long the scenes were. And I think you're right about it, like it could have been 3.5 hours. Like Lord of the Rings was 3.5 hours with the extended cut, which is basically what this is. The problem though is that a lot of it could have been shaved, and I think that the structure of it made it feel longer than 3 or 4 hours. So I feel like I can't call it a movie, and I feel like I can't really compare it as a movie to the Whedon cut as a movie because I don't feel like it's the same medium, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, no, I can hear that. I feel that I think it still does work as as a movie because we have these other movies like Endgame or Infinity War, specifically Endgame, which are 3 hour epics, 3 hour plus epics, and they're intended to be epics. And I feel like I look at this movie like it's a part of a trilogy. It's a trilogy of universe defining or universe building films. It wasn't intended to be kind of the Avengers type movie that the way the Avengers was because it couldn't be. The Avengers had like four other movies before that to kind of actually more than that to get them to the point where they were. I think it was like six other movies before the Avengers came out. But this movie didn't have that luxury. So like I feel that even though the movie was like segmented into parts, I remember thinking to myself, did it does it feel like I just got finished watching an episode? And I think this is going to vary from person to person, but for me, it didn't feel like I got done watching an episode. It felt like I got done watching a scene, and then we're on to the next scene. So like so for me, it still does work as a movie, but I really don't feel like it needs to be 4 hours. I think it's 4 hours because of the fact that things are included at the end of this movie which are basically to show you what could have been. And if this movie didn't have the history that it had, that stuff wouldn't have been there. Um, it's thrown in there for fan service as a hey, look, this is what I could have done.
You're referring to the epilogue?
The epilogue. Yep.
Right. So if you don't count the epilogue, then it is exactly 3.5 hours. But to me, it still felt longer than a long movie. It felt really long. I mean, maybe that could have been because I had to pause it so many times throughout the movie, and so it really took me like all day to watch it. But I felt like I had to pause it a lot because it was really slow. Like the pacing of it is really slow, and I think it's not unusual for a Snyder film to be that slow moving, and there's a lot of slow motion in a lot of places that I didn't think it needed to be so slow motion. Like so when the Flash is going at fast speed, his surroundings are in slow motion, so that makes sense because he would be like
Right.
in regular speed, but he's in slow motion too, so it's slow motion in slow motion when he's being really really fast, and that was just like too much for me in some places. But there were a lot of other things that were too slow for me, and I think that just kind of dragged out the film a little bit longer than it needed to be. uh how did you feel
Hmm.
about the slow motion?
Like I feel that to me the slow motion is the weakest part of the movie. I got the most hype when in the first 15 minutes you see Wonder Woman like break through the doors in this scene that was also in the Whedon cut of her trying to stop these like terrorists that are going to kill themselves. But there's a couple of added things in that scene that make it cool. When you see this really like cool moment where Wonder Woman literally blocks all these bullets from a machine gun being fired at her like quickly before moving and then tripping this guy and then hitting another guy into a wall, that feels cool because of the fact that it's fast. And if you slow down each block, it doesn't feel as powerful. So that was a moment where I was happy that they didn't slow down her doing those particular actions because in that moment it feels good. It's like Feora in Man of Steel. You don't want to slow down Feora moving quickly because you want to really establish that the people fighting her really have no chance. Um, so that's when I want scenes to be quick. The Flash being slowed down, that's fine. But for instance, scenes like, and then certain other moments that are meant to just kind of show like something epic happening, like that's that slowdown I can also get behind. But Arthur Curry uh walking down a pier at the beginning of the movie with with a song that felt really out of place for me in that scene, but with all the waves crashing and him standing there, it didn't really that did not feel necessary to me. That felt like a moment where slow mo kind of worked against the film. Um, but that's like one of those. That's one of a few moments where I think it's used in a non-action set piece. But I think in general, this movie could deal with having a few fewer slowdown sequences. So I agree with you there.
I definitely feel like, well, the whole part with Arthur Curry doing the Little Mermaid thing at the pier, that I felt like it wasn't even necessary to have, because I feel like it didn't really add anything to the film except for show us another in another way that he's not happy.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that it added very much to the film. The other thing that really bugged me was all the slow motion with the Amazonians with the queen taking the
Mm.
cube, and like how it takes her 10 minutes to get out of the temple. Like I thought we were like in a. I feel like I should feel like I'm in a hurry, and I do feel like I'm in a hurry because you're moving real slow, and everything's in slow motion when she's like about to leave. Even when she's yelling for them to seal the like temple, and then it doesn't really pick up until after um,
And they get on the
Steppenwolf
horses and they
comes
have to
out of the
play
water, and then
hopscotch.
yeah, exactly. That to me, like there are parts of the because a lot of the shots and scenes are also in the Joss Whedon version. So there are a lot of them, and that being one of them, where I feel like Joss Whedon did it better. It's the same stuff, but I feel like he cut it better. He did have to change things and add things, and like those are probably the things that maybe didn't work for most people, as opposed to the Snyder version. But I feel like the editing in Joss Whedon's version is stronger than in Snyder's version.
You're talking about in terms of like the action sequences?
Just in general, for yeah, action sequences, but everything that was in both movies, scenes that were in both movies, I tended to like Joss Whedon's version more because they were more concise. So that worked for me. Be it there are a lot of extra stuff in the Snyder version that I liked and appreciated. For the action scenes, like yeah, I like it, but I feel like some of them were a little too long because of the slow motion.
And I think that's fair. This kind of reminds us of our Ghost in the Shell conversation, and I feel like for me, I don't necessarily feel that something being more concise necessarily always works because while Whedon's movie is more concise as a whole, the story suffers for it because the story wasn't built to be that concise. So it's kind of it kind of has to work hand in hand. And if Whedon had made his own movie, then maybe it'd be different. He was working in another person's framework, but I think that that desire to make that film 2 hours hurts that movie overall and hurts the storytelling potential of that movie because it means that you now have a more one-dimensional villain. It means that you now have a character like Cyborg where you're almost kind of asking, well, why are you here other than the fact that you can connect with the mother boxes? So for me, while I 100% agree with the slow-mo, but I think I tend to disagree when it comes to the handling of the story itself.
So I think that's why we feel so differently about these movies, is because I'm kind of coming at it from the perspective where I don't really know very much about the world, the universe, the other movies because I forgot even though I watched them before like long ago, but I don't remember like anything. So when I saw the Joss Whedon version of Justice League, to me I was like, okay, I get it. I got it. It wasn't the greatest, but like there were definitely problems with it, but as a singular movie, it worked for me. For this movie, knowing that it's part of a universe, there's things that happen before it, there's things that will happen after it, and having the room and time to explain everything works for me. But they're two different things. So I think they both work for me just in different ways. And I think that is something that, like, I feel, I kind of hit on it a little bit earlier, that I have to make really clear is that they're two very different things that you have to look at separately. And I think
Yeah.
it's easier for me to look at it separately because I don't remember everything and because I went into the Joss Whedon movie with a completely different perspective. And then watching the Zack Snyder version after I get all the information filled in for me, where like, oh, I'm supposed to know this and oh, I'm supposed to know that, and so now it makes sense, and I enjoyed the Snyder version because I got all that extra information. But then I'm also looking at the Whedon version, being like, well, I think Whedon did a good job of shaving this down. Like if Zack Snyder had to cut his 4 hour movie down to 2 hours, I really wonder what it would look like, because he had 4 hours to explain all this complicated backstory. It's great. It's beautiful. It was good storytelling. I mean, I still have some problems with like the structuring of it, but having all the scenes there for me to see and to get the information was nice. It like I felt good about the movie and the story. Maybe
Right.
just not as a 4 hour movie. I feel like it's not a 4 hour movie. It's a section of part of a whole bigger thing. Whereas Joss Whedon's Justice League is just a movie Justice League.
Right. Yeah. And I yeah, that's probably one of the biggest differences. And it's like if you sat down and watched Avengers Endgame and then you tried to cut that movie down into 2 hours, I don't think it would work because it's not built that way. And also trying to watch Endgame as its own movie doesn't really work because it's not built that way. So I think that what it comes down to is what was Snyder's intention, and I think his intention was what you just said, to make it as a part of a whole. And while Whedon found a way to make that movie work as a standalone movie, as far as just being a Justice League movie, that's also ultimately why it does not work in the grand scheme of the story that's being told because it is meant to be a part of a greater whole, the same way Endgame is meant to be a part of Infinity War, which is meant to be a part of all the 21 movies that came before it. Um, but we are at around, we've been going for a little bit now. This is a good time to check in about time. Do you want to do our own little Snyder cut of this discussion and do this part one and end it here and then get ready to start our part two of our conversation? Because I get the feeling there's a little bit more that we wanted to say that we haven't touched on yet.
I couldn't agree more. Let's cut it here. Let's do a part two, and we can regroup.
All right. So then we're gonna do a quick ending out of here. So this is our part one to our discussion of the Snyder Cut. Have you seen it? What did you think about it? Comment below, let us know. And while you're down there, if you give a like, share, subscribe. Even if you don't, though, I've been Chris, and this has been.
Cheryl, and we'll see you soon for part two.